Okay. So welcome everybody. We're so grateful that you guys are here to enjoy this conversation with Elizabeth Lowe. So I will just go ahead and read your biography just to introduce you. Um, Elizabeth Lowe is an award-winning filmmaker who is interested in finding new aesthetic ways of exploring the boundaries between species, class, and unequal states of personhood. Her debut feature, Stray, won the top jury prize at Hot Docs and was nominated for an Independent Spirit Award, a Critics' Choice Award, and 2 Cinema Eye honors after premiering at the Tribeca Film Festival in 2020. Stray will be released theatrically by Magnolia Pictures, which we have seen, in 2021. Elizabeth's award-winning short films, including Hotel 22, Bison Head, Mother's Day, Closure President, Last Stop in Santa Rosa, Treasure Island, Notes from Buena Vista, have been released for distribution to educational institutions and libraries around the world. Elizabeth was born and raised in Hong Kong and holds a BFA from NYU Tisch School for the Arts and an MFA from Stanford University. Elizabeth is currently in development on her second feature-length film under the mentorship of the Concordia Studio Fellowship. And she's calling now from Hong Kong. So we're so grateful that you woke up this early to be with us.
Yeah, thank you for having
Thank you
me.
so much. Yeah. Okay, so if everybody could questions, Q&A, put them in the chat and we can use, but to start it off, why don't we just get to know you, Elizabeth, and how you got interested in this kind of approach to this film. What was it that interested you about this story?
Um, I obviously am a dog lover, and in terms of approach, I knew that the film wouldn't have much dialogue because I wanted the film to exist in a space where it was inviting audiences to perceive the world in a language I think that's older than words, that's less prescriptive and about gestures and body language, and maybe very much in the way that dogs might perceive the world. And so when I decided to set the film around a stray dog, wandering through Istanbul and eavesdropping on different human conversations that unfold around Zeytin, the main dog character, um, it was very much this exercise in seeing what our world looks like from the defamiliarized gaze of dogs. It was important for the whole film to take place from the dog's point of view, like very literally lower to the ground. And I'm not sure what the effect of that is, but I do think it challenges viewers to perceive the world in a slightly different way than they normally would. And then also through the sound design, we drift in and out of a distorted, defamiliarized sonic space to try to not literally represent dog hearing because that's impossible, but at least gesture towards a different way of hearing and perceiving in the world that might not be human, to move away from the anthropocentric worldview that is so destructive to our planet. And so Stray is this attempt to sort of, wrap a story around a non-human gaze and see where that takes us and whatever that might say about us and also dogs themselves.
Wow. Yeah, I was thinking about the camera work, how it's very dog level, and it definitely made me really feel the vulnerability. You are close to the ground. You can't, like, we're used to being 5 foot whatever, however tall you are, and you can see a little bit more. So it definitely gave me that visual kind of disconcerted feel. I don't know. I can't have like as much visual information when I go about my life. So that was the thing. Um, so we have a question from Sarah Gleason. How did you choose Zayton as your subject? Did you follow a lot of other dogs, but then decide to focus on I think you meant her in the final project as she told the best story?
Yeah, Zayton is a girl. And we went through I was looking back at my photos recently of the production period, and there were, I feel like maybe a week of us just wandering through Istanbul, me and my co-producer, Zeynep Kapırlı, who's based in Istanbul. We would wander around different neighborhoods searching for dogs that seemed to live really dynamic lives. And when we came across Zayton, we were in this really busy underground tunnel and she was running past us and weaving between everyone's feet. And that really intrigued us because that made us wonder, like, where does a stray dog have to be? Like, what appointments does a stray dog have to keep when they don't have jobs and they don't have homes and they don't have owners? And Zayton ended up being on the heels of the young Syrian men who become a prominent part of the film. Um, and their relationship, that on and off again relationship of love and warmth, was really moving to me. That Zayton was providing these young men from Syria with this sense of home and belonging, even when they didn't have physical homes to live in. And also, Zayton was a super stubborn dog and a very independent dog. And so, for some reason, she would just allow me to be inches from her face as I filmed and would still not sort of react or engage and would kind of ignore me, even though I'm sure she was fully aware of my presence and probably what I was doing. But she somehow had this ability to let her guard down and also be really at ease in front of the camera. That was really rare. Most dogs weren't able to behave that way.
Yeah, that's super interesting. It was like some of the shots, like the last shot, you're like right there, and she's just like looking around, doing her thing, and like most humans can't even do that when the camera's.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. I think she has a star quality that certain humans have in front of the camera, and not all of us have that. And she certainly does, even if she's a dog.
So we got another question emailed ahead of time. Wondering about the fate of the black and white puppies took. Um, so I believe that was Cartal, right? Is that
Yeah.
how you pronounce it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, Cartal.
unfortunately, to this day, I still have no idea what happened to Kartal. Um, After he was arrested, or he was taken in by the police who arrest the young men were released 48 hours later. But when we went to ask the police where Kartal was, they kept giving us different versions of stories. Like they dropped them off at the shelter, and we had relationships with all the shelters. So Kartal never showed up in a shelter. So what we suspect is that a policeman took Kartal in and just didn't want to tell us because legally the police should have dropped Kartal off at a city shelter. And that was one of the big ethical dilemmas that we experienced during production. When the young men had stolen Kartal, we had a big, serious debate about whether to intervene, whether to return Kartal to the construction site where his family was. But then we also didn't know what the emotional impact that would have on the boys who clearly desired to acquire a puppy, to grow their pack on the streets, and to provide for another being, even when their own circumstances were so harsh. And we also saw Zaytan and Nazar, who were very well adjusted in the city and had these friendships with the boys. And we had hoped that maybe Kartal would grow into that in this street life away from his family, because we also had no idea what would happen to those dogs who lived on the construction site once it was converted into the park that it was, that was being built, the boardwalk that was being built. What we couldn't be certain about whether the life of that black and white gang of dogs was safer than Zaytan and Nazar and Kartal under the care of the young men. And so we had all these Pandora's box speculations about the future. But before we could sort of intervene, the police took Kartal away. And so we never had the chance to do anything.
Wow, that's fascinating. Yeah, you never really had the had to make that like ethical choice. That's crazy. Yeah, I was really interested. I watched the Q&A that you recorded after the film, and you talked about the ethics of intervening as a filmmaker and as a documentary filmmaker, and I thought that was really really interesting, like
Is this
especially when it comes to animals.
yeah, is this with Rachel Grady, that Q&A, or which one was it?
uh it was I I'm forgetting their names. The animal rescue
Oh, okay.
woman,
Yeah.
and um,
Thomas Lafley,
the
the
interview.
Turkish. Yeah.
Yes, 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 yes. Yeah,
Cool.
yeah, yeah. So, yeah, talk a little bit about maybe for those people who hadn't seen that Q&A, um, the moments of like, do I intervene? Do I not intervene?
No, I mean, I think when you're working with animals, animals just aren't protected by the same laws as humans. They can't sue you after production or even during production. So really, when you're working with animals, they can't even explicitly consent, I suppose, or sign any releases. Um, they can't speak. So I think the onus is very much on the documentary filmmaker to respect their subjects as they would any human. And I would argue even more so because they are so vulnerable. And there were many instances where, like Nazar caught a cat at one point as I was filming, and I, stopped my camera to save the cat because it just didn't feel like, if I was there, my role as a human being doesn't cease just because I'm, behind a camera when this is unnecessary killing. So there were many instances like that where I I feel like I put aside the film for reality and a respect for life, because I think that no art and no film is worth sort of the death or suffering of beings if you truly proclaim to like care about the beings that are in your film.
Yeah, I second that for sure. So here's another question. Can you talk about your choice to include Greek proverbs as those powerful poetic moments of punctuation throughout the documentary, and the particular Greek philosopher you chose was very intentional.
Yeah, so Diogenes is this Greek philosopher who founded a philosophical movement called Cynicism. He was known as the dog philosopher, and he was actually born in Sinope, which is the land, and on the land of modern day Turkey. And he felt that street dogs, because they're not complicit in systems of work, labor, marriage, property, and wealth, that they lived lives that were more pure than humans, and that from that standpoint, they would be able to observe the follies of human civilization better. Um, and this film is really trying to put that ancient idea into practice. What happens when we watch dogs carefully and spend hours with them? What does that reveal? And also, just on a very like technical level, I think the film can feel relentless without those black moments of breathing, because you're just with the dog throughout the film. There's no establishing shot, there's no wide shots. You're never barely at human level. So I think for audiences who are used to a certain type of storytelling that gives you that breathing space, but that my film resisted, because, and my cinematography resisted, because we were trying to be so close to a dog's eye view of the world and to perceive the world in its minutia, and staying close to the ground and sniffing things through the camera, that those things, the black text was like a relief for audiences, in the same way that the human conversations are sort of like cutaways to the animal story that provide us with this relief from the intensity of a non-human representation.
Yeah, yeah, you're right. It is very intense. It's very close up and sort of almost abstract in a way. It's like, what am I looking at? Oh, that's a dog. That's you know, a dog's fur. Um, so this was your first feature after a handful of shorts. How was, I mean, shorts versus feature? Like how, what did you learn? What what did you come across that you weren't expecting or you were expecting or yeah, anything.
I'm really glad that this ended up being a feature. I'd set out to make a feature, but it was hard to get support for it just because it is pretty like idiosyncratic vision and saying like, I don't know what the story is. We're just going to leave the story up to a bunch of dogs. That was not comforting to funders. So I feel, but we did get support from Rooftop Films, which I'm super grateful for, and Ari, Amira, the Alexa grant, and a few other sort of smaller funders, and we're able to make this feature, which for me is really meaningful. That like a dog like Zayton's life is worthy of 72 minutes of our time. That she's inconspicuous and innocuous as a being, but pre-COVID, I had imagined that her face would be projected like on a 10-foot screen, and that was important, almost politically, that beings that are not human matter in the world. And by extension, not just dogs, obviously, all other sort of non-human life that's so marginalized.
The bridge that was frequently in the background of cityscape shots provided an anchor and a sense of the neighborhood. Across how much of the city did you follow Zayton while shooting?
Yeah, that city is that bridge goes across the Bosphorus and it connects two neighborhoods. I think the Eastern and the Asian and European side. Maybe my sense of geography was never very good. I just relied on the dogs to take me where they wanted through the city. But definitely Zayton probably had like a few miles range throughout the city where she would go. And the way that we kept track of her was we would put these mini tractive GPS pet tracking collars onto her at the end of the shoot day. And I'd be able to see on my phone where she went after we had left her throughout the night. And she had a pretty big range, crossing different neighborhoods and districts of Istanbul. But Karakoy, which is the area that she mostly slept in and hung out in, that was sort of like her home base, where even if the trackers got stolen, we would be able to find her around one or two of her favorite cafes.
Wow. Did she have like a routine, she had her home base and then she went to this place, or what was her days like?
I mean, I think she would allow the day just to take her where she wanted to. I think that's the life of a stray dog, especially a young stray dog like Zayton. Whenever she would encounter the boys or run into Nazar and the boys, then she would follow them and go on a longer adventure further away from home, following them. And then when she would get bored or when she was hungry, she would go search for food elsewhere on her own. So it was very much sort of, it felt very like you can see it in the opening of the film. The first 7 minutes is just her wandering around through different parks, playing with different dogs, having these moments of like joy and freedom and pockets of friendships wherever she goes, chance encounters. It was a really beautiful existence, I think, the types of lives that stray dogs in Istanbul lead. And she was never desperate for food. When we would try to feed her to try to wake her up, because she would sleep a lot until like 5 p.m. and we would worry about what are we doing here in Turkey with our limited time? Are we going to be able to film anything? And do stray dogs really do anything? She would never wake up for the food that we tried to offer her because she was able to find such a rich, better diet than we were able to give her. And she just totally lived life on her own terms, on her own schedule, and eating sausages and bones everywhere she went.
Love it. Sounds like living the dream.
Yeah,
Sausages and bones.
I think the dogs of Istanbul are really, really lucky, so much luckier than all the dogs that, are unowned in America, languishing in cells or waiting to be euthanized if they don't get adopted. And seeing the way stray dogs lived and how rich their lives could be, even without owners, really changed my mind about sort of like what types of systems are the best models to replicate in terms of humane stray animal management, which I think in the West we tend to think of cities with a lot of stray animals as being inhumane or not caring for the dogs. But what I found is that it's the opposite. It's the fact that our cities, like in New York or LA or London, they don't have dogs allowed to just be dogs, even if they're unowned by people. That's what's really inhumane. That they're policed and persecuted simply for having the DNA of a dog, essentially.
Yeah, I thought it was really interesting how you said that when you were putting the collars, the tracking collars, on at the end of the day, people would be like, "What are you doing? Like, this
Yeah.
dog is not yours."
Yeah, people were very protective of the dogs, even if they were unowned, even if they were nameless to the citizens or the city people around those dogs. They were very proud and understood that these dogs had the right to whatever territory they were in. And even by law, when the government picks dogs up to vaccinate them of rabies or neuter and spay them, which there is a program in place, they have to legally return them to the place where they found them, which is such a profound level of respect that I think even humans aren't afforded that in a lot of cities. So yeah, I was really impressed as somebody who's like a complete foreigner to Turkish culture and
Yeah.
that way of being in a city.
So we have another question. Do you know what happened to the young men after they were released from jail? And do you get more people asking what happened to the puppy or what happened to the young men? Uh,
Yeah, so the young men go back to living their lives as they have always. They told me that they were routinely arrested in this way. People would complain about them sleeping on the streets or whatever. And I think it's just a form of harassment of their lives, ensuring that the streets are not too, don't get too comfortable for them. And a question that does come up um, is this film a commentary about how we treat, or the people in the film seemed to treat the dogs better than the humans? And I think for me, that's like, I don't, for me, I didn't observe that at all. To me, there's a lot of warmth for the men throughout the film that is in the tone of the way the elderly security men, even as they're kicking those boys out of the abandoned ruins, they're patting them on the back. They're trying to advise them not to sniff glue anymore. You know, they're talking about them. There's, you know, passersby who give misguided advice to the young men, telling them, go back to your country and you can get an education in Syria. Like at least people are engaging with them in a way that I don't, and the fact that Turkey has the largest refugee population right now, unlike most of Western Europe or North America, I was really struck by how a lot of Turks that I asked, how do you feel about refugees? It was never a politicized question, whether they were conservative or liberal. Everybody basically had the attitude that these are people in need. Why wouldn't we let them in for their safety? Despite, of course, there is not enough infrastructure in Turkey to support the lives of refugees. And whether I get from audience members asking what happened to the puppy or what happened to the young men, I think people care about people. I think people care about animals too. And so I get questions for both.
yeah, I think people also care about adorable puppies.
Yeah, but I really think this whole idea that, oh, we care more about cute puppies than people is a false question, because oppression occurs on a spectrum, and it's a like you oppress animals, eventually you oppress women, you oppress Black people, eventually that's going to work its way to the center of society too. You oppress non-citizens, eventually citizens will be oppressed too. So I don't think saying that, oh, we treat animals better than humans, like that to me is predicated on the belief that humans deserve more moral consideration than animals, which is predicated on this idea that we live in hierarchy. and that we have superiority and we are worth more moral consideration than beings that are different than us, which is what racism and sexism and other types of isms are all based on, discrimination based on difference. And that was something I learned very early on as an undergrad studying philosophy and ethics, that speciesism is just as much, just another part of this fight for justice. And to try to degrade the rights of animals or to say that the fight for animal rights is somehow trivial is toxic and destructive.
Wow. I know you have another interview coming up. Do you have time for one more question?
Yeah.
Or no?
Yeah, I have one more
Okay.
time.
Okay. This is our last question. So just reading like the descriptions of some of your films and watching short films, you used to center these subjects that are on the outskirts of society or the place where they are. What are some characteristics of these subjects where they're humans or dogs or animals or whatever? What are some of the common characteristics that you've noticed in this kind of place that these beings hold in our society?
For me, I'm interested in the perspective of outsiders. And for me, with Stray, the stray dogs embodied the most outsider perspective that you could have, where you're half in human society and half out of it. And then with other films that I've made, they tend to be about people who are surviving on the margins and either thriving or feeling the weight of oppression on their backs or their lives. And it's because as a filmmaker, I want to make films that accurately reflect the realities that I see around myself and in other people's stories. And I think the view from the peripheries, from the sidelines, from the least powerful members of society is often the more accurate view of any condition than from the center or the powers or the establishment. That's why I'm drawn, I think, to the outside rather than the inside. And that's why the film follows stray dogs throughout public spaces in Istanbul.
Yeah. All right. Well, we'll let you go because you have a busy day ahead of you. um, but thank you so much. And so if people want to watch your other short films, can they watch them on your, at least some of
Yeah, I
them?
can. Yeah, I can type where people can find them here. My website has a lot of my short films on there. And then if you want to tag Stray Dog Film or keep updated on what's happening with the subjects of the film or the film's journey itself, we're on social media at that handle.
Awesome. That's perfect. We will definitely do a follow.
Thanks so much.
Great. Well, thank you guys so much for attending, and it's been really great. And yeah, thanks for joining us, Elizabeth.
Thanks. Bye.
All right. Bye, everyone.
Bye.